Hello, hello. This is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. This episode is a part of our Kitchen Side series, where we pull back the curtain and show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, and brainstorming sessions that we have at our agency. In this conversation, we cover the topic of AI search, trust, and how research is shaping the new world of discovery. We start with a relatively epistemological topic on the idea of good versus bad research, how data can easily mislead, how marketers can and should interpret findings, and what quote unquote truth means when everything is built on samples, correlations, and human biases. Basically, how do you figure out what to trust when you're looking at research in SEO and AI search? From there, we dive into how buyers are actually using LLMs in their purchase journeys, what our latest research with Winter uncovered, and why transparency seems to beat perfection when it comes to brand communications in the AI era. Then we explore org charts, measurement, and SEO roles and how they're evolving as AI search reshapes visibility and influence. And we talk about cross-functional collaboration. So PR, content, product marketing teams, all of them have to work in concert nowadays. And we even talk about potentially new org structures and roles to own this complex landscape. Finally, we get a little philosophical about the future, talking about how consumers discover brands in an AI-dominated world, what personalization means when your AI assistant knows you better than your own marketing team, and how to build authentic influence amid it all. Without further ado, here is the Long Game Podcast.
I want to start with something really basic, but I think we've seen a lot of research and we're like, this is bad research. But folks pay a lot of attention to that. So what's bad research versus what's good research?
Epistemology. Good start to the day, David. How does one know anything?
What is knowledge?
Yeah, exactly. Research has to be internally and externally valid, external validity and internal validity. So you think of a laboratory, like internal validity is like, are the conditions right in the lab to basically say the result that you got is true? And then external validity is like, once you take that outside of the lab, do those results still apply? So that's like a classic, psychology studies in the lab are often hard to replicate in reality because they're not externally valid. There's other factors that play in. That's very scientific.
Or they're done on undergrad university students,
which is sampling bias, right? Selection bias, and that's another component. Is like, who is your sample? How big is your sample? And then there's a hierarchy of evidence that people tend to use, which is basically like anecdotal data, anecdotes, N of one case studies, observational data, up to cross-sectional or observational data on groups across time, so correlations. Then there's kind of like twin studies or cohort-based. Then you've got randomized controlled trials, and then you've got meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials. So there's different levels of evidence. A lot of what you're seeing in AI search is correlational data or cross-sectional data. So you're taking a independent variable like brand visibility, and then you're looking at a bunch of dependent variables or dimensions, and you're trying to basically come up with an R squared or some sort of a relation between the two. This is where you get into bad data or bad research. Correlations are obviously, they don't have to be related. There doesn't have to be a causal factor between them. So there's this website, I think it's called Spurious Correlations. This guy runs this site. Have you guys seen this?
No, but
TylerVegan.com. So there's a ton of charts. We could put a link in the description, but you've got like Google searches for Batman correlates perfectly with the number of security guards in Oklahoma.
I've heard of these.
He keeps them updated too. There's more and more. Annual household spending on laundry and cleaning supplies correlates almost perfectly with Google searches for flights for Antarctica. So obviously a correlation doesn't necessarily mean that there's a relationship between the variables. But then sometimes you look at correlations and you'll see these scatter plots with data all over the place. And then somebody will just draw a fucking trend line. And like oftentimes it's because there's one extreme outlier variable that just lifts this trend line up. And you're like, well, if you took that variable out, then there would be no trend line. And obviously just from a common sense level, you look at that data and you don't apply it R squared. And you're like, okay, there's clearly no patterns here. Like I wouldn't bet my life on the predictions, from the X and Y axis, relating to each other. This is a random one, but have you guys ever seen this chart of it's like IQ and testosterone levels?
No, but I would really like to see that.
This is one of the funniest charts I've ever seen because there is one data point who is like 160 IQ. And like 800 testosterone. Here, I'm going to send this in our Slack chat. We have to put this in the show notes. This is just.
What do you think this guy does for a living?
Exactly. Yeah, they're like, who is this guy? So a data point like that will pull up the chart. And I'm not saying like our research is perfect. It's like there's so many limitations with research. Basically, like the two studies we did, the limitation is we're asking people their opinions or how they're behaving. We're not actually measuring their behavior. So there's also a common constraint with data in that people don't necessarily accurately describe how they behave. Like what people say and what people do is often very different. And that, you see that in like polling data with voting and in politics. But also it's like, all right, how did you spend your time last week? What did you have for breakfast each day? It's actually kind of hard to remember certain behaviors. So when you see people on LinkedIn say, oh, I replaced my Google search usage with ChatGPT, that may not actually be reflected by their behavior. It's reflective of their memory because your ChatGPT usage might be more salient given it's a new technology.
Yeah.
But that may not be behaviorally true. So that's my answer, David. That's my post-snap answer.
That was more in-depth than I expected. But I think it makes sense. And I think, especially with all the uncertainty, people want to come off as if they have certainty. Like whenever they have those scatter plots and a trend line and they're like, the R squared, it's like 20%. So there's this whole 20% correlation. I'm like, there is no correlation there. And it just reminds me of, what's that quote? Like, there are lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. Mm-hmm. So whenever you see a chart, just be really skeptical about how they got there, including our research.
It can also, even if the data itself on the surface level isn't entirely, so to speak, accurate, like it can, if you critical think, you can find a deeper layer to it, or maybe it can provoke more interesting questions. So on the correlation stuff, that's actually usually an exploratory data analysis tool to figure out how you would run a controlled experiment or what you would set up as a test variable. So one of them I saw a while back was something around like AI search visibility, correlating pretty well with branded search volume, which makes sense because you think about it for 10 seconds and you're like, all right, like what do those two things have in common? Like that may be a latent variable. And it's like brand awareness, right? Somebody who's like very aware of your brand is going to, you're going to have more brand searches and you're also going to show up more in AI searches. And that could be, the causal variable could be the number of billboards you have, or like your ad spend, or just like your time in market, and those things could be more interesting as actually useful components. The brand and search volume, or brand mentions or whatever, isn't as interesting because it's oftentimes a lagging indicator. But you can start to dig in a little deeper, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So what was our research?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So the summary of like the winter. So we did a study called Prompt to Purchase with Winter. And it was the one analyzing 100 business decision makers and how they use LLMs. And a couple of main findings were, if I'm going off of memory here, a pretty significant percentage of people start their purchase journey using an LLM, like ChatGPT, AI Mode, Perplexity, or Google search. Those hovered roughly around 50%, because some people would say, oh, I use Google or ChatGPT, right? So we would count that as like both, essentially, as the first touch point. Mm-hmm. So point number one, the LLM experience is transforming the customer journey. It's that wouldn't have existed 5 years ago, right? That's an entirely new touch point within the customer journey. second piece is that a large percentage of people stop using LLMs in their purchase journey once they have their basic set of options to compare from. From that point, they're typically going to use peers. That was one of the most trustworthy touch points, is just talking to your peer networks, friends, colleagues, groups like Pavilion, Slack groups you're in, essentially one-to-one peer connections, review sites, and then branded materials on your website. So they would basically go fact check and validate and verify the information being true, and also the experience being good outside of what the LLMs say about you. And generally, I would say we analyze sort of the 5 or 6 or 7 touch points along, first touch to the final decision. And people tend to ping back and forth between these. It's not like a linear journey. It's not like somebody searches on ChatGPT, clicks a link, goes to a website, asks a friend, and then purchases. Mm-hmm. It's going to kind of ping back and forth, which is kind of a common finding in a lot of user research related to customer journeys, is that it's not like a linear funnel. I think Google's put out research on that called the messy middle. Ashley Foss, remember, she had that phrase, it was like the content playground, not content funnel, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So those were some of the main findings.
Yeah, I pulled up the research. So it was like majority of people started with traditional search. 46% specifically mentioned Google, and it's still the default first step. 42% use LLMs to start the search. 25% specifically mentioned ChatGPT. And then, once they get to the consideration set, like 27% are like, I talk to peers. I don't just trust these LLMs and take what they say as truth.
Did you see there was recent research from Profound that had quite different findings? But I'm not saying either one is right or wrong. I think Profound's was based on their own user data, but it spans across all purchase categories. So it included consumer purchases and probably, very like frictionless purchases, whereas ours were more like complex business decisions.
Yeah, I would, because when I was preparing for that client ELT meeting that I was a part of, I pulled from a lot of this. And there's a section in the report that says, as soon as stakes rise, buyers turn back to human validated sources. Why? When reputations, careers, and company money are on the line, no one's going to tell their executive team, I trusted ChatGPT, which I think that's the separating factor between B2B and B2C purchases. Like, I use personally ChatGPT to get to the final stage if I'm buying like a pair of shoes or something like that. I do a lot of my research, a lot of my like digging, and then depending on, what it is, I'll ask friends. But if I'm buying on behalf of our company, it's very unlikely I would do all of my digging, all of my shortlisting, and then make the final decision just through an LLM. I feel like that's where the difference is.
I'm actually curious to dig into that a little bit more deeply, because our research didn't necessarily answer the question, like which variable kind of makes you more or less likely to trust a ChatGPT recommendation. Mm-hmm. And yes, there's the vantage point of like buying on behalf of a business, given like your professional reputation may be on the line. But I also wonder if like the price point matters, or if maybe even like their business model matters. If it's a freemium product versus free trial, single player solution versus multiplayer team suite, like a CMS has to be, versus like a Loom that you can kind of use on your own for the first mile.
Right.
So I think there's follow-up questions that could be pretty interesting there. And even on the consumer side, like I would just kind of trying to analyze my own behavior here. Ooh. I would probably not go buy a watch based on ChatGPT's recommendations, but I would probably use it as a pretty solid research touch point.
Yeah, cut down the noise.
And that's because it's going to be a higher complexity, higher expensive purchase. So there might be more nuance even within them.
Speaking of, when we look at the stages that we tracked here, the final stage is final decision. Now, is that making a purchase with like a company credit card? Is that booking a demo? Is that signing up for a trial? Like, I think that also is where there might be variance, because booking a demo, like, biggest risk is just you're losing time on many calls. And once you have those conversations with the vendor, depending on what it is, that might help you make your final decision. But if it's under budget enough where you could use your company credit card, that might be different too. I'm curious, but like beyond that final decision where it separates.
Yeah, there's a million decisions that I make just like very ad hoc and very like whimsically. Like I'm thinking of Product Hunt. I don't use it as much as I used to, but I used to go on there and just kind of flip through and, I'd try the product of the day or something, even if it's not like entirely like it's the biggest pain point in my life. It's like, oh, cool new note-taking system. I'll try that out for a day. And it's like free and, there's zero risk for me and I'm not introducing it to my company versus when I was running the search for an experimentation platform at HubSpot. Holy shit, like I'm going to look like a fool if I choose the wrong one. So I really put a lot of time and effort into like building out a comparison table and getting pricing, getting on all the demos and making sure that we chose the right solution for us, which was a big finding too, is that like fit to needs was a huge component in LLMs, because we also analyzed what needs to be in place within an LLM output for you to trust and, validate the response. And fit to needs was one of the biggest components outside of price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this point in the executive summary that transparency beats perfection. Vendors win when they clearly articulate who they serve, how they fit, and where their limits are. Buyers reward clarity and honesty over polished generic marketing. I feel like LLMs are really this really refreshing forcing function for just clarity and transparency. Yeah, that really appealed to me.
I found that to be, maybe I'm being a little biased or like reading into that too much, but that goes into what we talked about on product marketing being more important. And even if it's like, this is actually where we diverge a little bit from classic SEO strategy and tactics, which is like rank a page, match search intent. You're kind of trying to reverse engineer what people expect. Whereas with LLMs, like your page might get pulled in based on some of those factors, but what's on the page actually starts to influence the outputs and how you're spoken about. So then it's like, all right, like we can't just generically say we're a CRM. We have to index on the fact that we're an AI native CRM and we're best used by founders with small teams, because that's maybe the wedge by which we can compete with HubSpot. Whereas if we just had the generic page like best CRM, which would work in the classic SEO world, it's not necessarily going to translate as well to that fit for needs and the transparency aspect that you're talking about, Ali.
Well, it also is like, we've talked about the value of LLMs as this like self-qualification layer for potential leads, which is, I think, doing sales teams a favor. People come to you, they know what they want, they know how your tool fits their needs, their team. But in order to do that, everything online has to be accurate and transparent. So I feel like this GEO, strategy and this program that we're standing up, visibility is a big part of it, sentiment's a big part of it, but I feel like accuracy is also this like underlying metric that a lot of people aren't thinking of, or underlying factor to this work. I think we talked about this in a couple episodes ago, but one of the clients I was working with, they recently changed their pricing structure last year, did away with their free trial, didn't update anything. There was even content on their own website that still said free trial. So they were having folks like shortlist, using LLMs to shortlist a couple tools, get to the sales call, and they were pissed because they thought there was a free trial. And the sales team was like, yo, like I'm losing leads. Like I'm losing these conversations where they'd otherwise be a great fit, but the expectation was there. Whose fault is that? I mean, a lot of different people or nobody, I don't know. But it kind of circles back to this whole like online reputation management, like online presence management, again, outside the bounds of classic SEO, but in fixing a lot of their on-site content and then off-page review pages within, I think, 2 months. You can type that prompt and it's all fixed now. So I feel like there's this other like lever to pull on like pre-qualification using transparent and accurate information across the internet, which transcends visibility, I think, or like the number of times your brand is mentioned.
100%.
Yeah, there's an interesting balance there, because I had a prospect say like, hey, we noticed that sometimes our product is presented in a way where the sentiment is negative, and how do we get that to become positive? I'm like, well, going and pitch those people to say that your product is actually good is probably not going to influence that. And you might want to pay attention to that feedback and improve your product. But they're coming to us and I'm like, hey, that's kind of going into reputation management and trying to influence people's sentiment about your product, which has nothing to do with SEO and AE or GEO. It has to do with, well, how's the product? And maybe I also want to differentiate between like, maybe there's outdated information. Like if it was based on an older version of the product and the sentiment is negative, yeah, definitely let's get that updated and like reach out to them and see if they'll do an updated review. If it was just published today and it's like comparing you to a competitor and it's quite honest about where your shortcomings are and where they're better and where you're better or where you're not as good, that's not I mean, I guess you could say marketing should try to fix that, but that's a product problem.
So I disagree a little bit on I agree that it's not usually under the remit of SEO and it's not usually controllable, even if SEO wanted to own some of that. I disagree in the sense that I do think AEO should own that. And to the degree that it's controllable, I think that varies. There are certain cases where the product and the product experience and the customer experience are so negative that on the marketing side, you're not going to be able to do much with that.
Yeah.
You could imagine a very, very large brand who has thousands and thousands of bad reviews on Reddit and Glassdoor, et cetera. I mean, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle with a simple outreach or, deployment of, your company or your customer evangelist there. However, I think there's a lot of brands who have underlooked those aspects of their marketing and their broader web presence. And that could be true. Like the majority of small businesses probably don't put a lot of effort into their Glassdoor or their Reddit. So I do think if you apply some focus and a spotlight on some of those efforts, there are ways you can deploy your happiest customers, through an NPS system saying like, okay, anybody who rates us an 8, 9, or 10, we're going to trigger a quick email that says, hey, like, pop over on G2 and like give us a review. Assuming that not every business is already doing that, there is some potential to influence that. Because you might have a great product experience, but the only people who are reviewing you are just the unhappiest of customers, right?
It's like people who write reviews about their doctor. Like you don't really have anything to say unless if you have a bad experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah.
So
Alex, you had a question in our notes about how org charts are shifting. And just with this new AEO, GEO, AI search stuff. And I've had this conversation with a few clients of like, who needs to be involved? And usually you've got growth, SEO, content, et cetera. And I'm starting to consider like, we need to have a dotted line to PR and comms. Like we need to have a dotted line to product. I know we already do have a dotted line to product for like SME interviews and all of that. But when we're speaking about doing more off-page work, like review site management, Reddit now, it's only responsible to set up that feedback loop back to the folks that can control or do have more control on a lot of that stuff. And I would hope those product teams want to know that feedback too, because sometimes it's so far away from their domain that they're not aware of how the product is being spoken about, or maybe there's a frequency with which a certain product feature is mentioned. People really want this or they don't like this, or it just has really tightened the teams now. And it just makes me think like way back when at HubSpot and Shopify, like content teams just sat so far from the product and they were more focused on like content creation and traffic driving and all of that. And it's interesting to see how everything has really like closed up and tightened and kept everything focused on revenue and retention and customer retention too. So I think like no, SEO and content aren't necessarily in charge, but I think all teams that are contributing to digital visibility as a whole should have a direct line to product and PR and comms.
I think that's one of the most important questions that's not being asked enough is the org chart and the the teams that need to be involved to actually effectuate change. And I think so. I talked to Noah from Stacker on the podcast, which just got launched. Well, who knows when we'll publish this one, but recently, let's say. And I asked him that question, and he said basically, the person who owns this should have some analytical prowess, and that they are going to need some metrics to back up these decisions and be able to dig into the citation sources and figure out like how on the ground these decisions are being made. But then like the people who can actually effectuate change are often going to be the off-page teams like PR, product marketers, and content outside of SEO. And to his point, he's like SEO kind of elbowed in and took control of this early on, which may or may not make sense. But I think you're seeing that reflected in the tactics that people are talking about. SEOs are going to SEO. They're going to use the tools that they have access to. And everyone's talking about comparison pages and listicles, which I will not say is an AEO tactic. That's obviously been a tactic in SEO for years. It's so funny to me that people are like, oh, the AEO tactic of listicles. I'm like, where have you been? You think people just started spamming listicles? Like, geez. But yeah, like that's one way you can get visibility it's just a single tool within a broader tool set that's not being deployed right now because we're not actually incorporating the other teams that need to be involved.
Yeah, I think we had a conversation, this has been a minute now, about like internal buy-in and kind of getting team alignment on projects. Maybe I'm remembering a different conversation, but I think this is going to require a lot of soft skills in the coming years. If you're AEO, GEO, SEO, whatever, and you're like, hey, we need to stand up like a comparison library, and being ready to defend that decision, present to legal, present to like, because usually with larger brands, they're like, I don't want to talk about competitors. So it's hard to move that needle. And I had a conversation with a colleague at Toast, and she was like, can you put together like a research report as to why this is valuable to help me like make my case? Because I think we know it's valuable. We can speak to like, this is cited and this frequency, and, you know, this helps drive deals. And, you know, we pull together the concept, but like having some data and having really strong, just a strong pitch to be able to move the needle internally. Because it sucks sometimes to see those teams standing in the way of what would be a very valuable tactic, but they've got to look out for what they're responsible for. So it's really harnessing like a lot of that internal alignment to be able to do some of this stuff. I feel like that's an emerging skill for folks who don't have it yet.
Yeah. What's interesting is the roles that I've been speaking to on these calls that talk about AE or GEO is like, they tend to come more from the performance side of marketing. Like it's a head of growth or a VP of growth or a VP of marketing, where I'm assuming they're measured on pipeline. And so I had someone on a call actually say, we want to measure AEO the same way we measure direct performance, like pipeline. And I think based on our research, that may not be the right way to measure success if it's like so early in the journey. Maybe it's like on a first touch basis or something like that. But what I'm starting to wonder now is, if there was a VP or someone that's making a case for how this should be done internally, should that be a VP of growth? Should it be a brand person or a PR person? Like, who's going to corral the analytics support, the PR support, the on-page owned media support, the content support, to influence?
It feels like it should be a committee.
These channels,
like not a singular owner, because it really,
I hate that word.
I know, but in my opinion, it doesn't really matter who stands it up if you have to work with all those teams anyway. Like there should almost...
Well, couldn't it warrant like a new title then? Like a digital visibility chief or something like that? I know it would be a composite of people from different teams, thus the committee, but I always get a little wary when there's no single owner of kind of the program. I just feel like then kind of it falls by the wayside.
Yeah, if it's a new role, and give them all the permissions across all those teams. They have access to analytics, they have access to dream data, they have access to the digital PR stuff, the content team, if there needs to be something created or optimized. Like they have like lines to every single team, and they can pull whatever lever they need, because it's not just one team, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It seems very much like the approximation of a product manager, a product marketer in tech. In certain companies, obviously that role varies quite heavily, or a brand manager in the CPG world, where you're kind of standing up multiple programs that build a composite around your brand and how you launch and how you appear on shelves and like all of these different aspects. But like your shelf space now is AI engines.
Yeah, I think it would be cool to have a singular owner sit between all those teams, because then you can pull on specialists that have experience and have, like, you can pull on your digital PR team that has like the journalist relationships, and they've got those inroads to those publications, but that might be all they know to do. That might be what they do well. And then you have your content team that creates and optimizes, and then your dev team. And so having like, yeah, I'm repeating myself at this point, but I'm excited by that. That seems like something that could work well.
Yeah. I'm pulling from our time at HubSpot, where whenever there's like a new initiative, it wasn't like, hey, we're all of a sudden going to hire brand new people or like put full-time people full-time on this new thing. It'd be, hey, we're going to pull 20% of this person's time from the SEO team, 20% of this PM's team, 20% of this engineer, 20% of like X people. They come together like once a week, and it's like, hey, this is like a special project type thing that we're working. We're still validating it. That's why it's only 20% of all our time, but we take it seriously. And if you validate it, there may be a case to bring us on full time to this project. And right now, I think, as opposed to what I'm seeing right now, which is, hey, the SEO team is thinking about this. And then the question is, well, what about your PR team? What about your content team? Are they thinking about this as well? Because you need to do all those things to influence this stuff. And like, does customer marketing have a voice in this? Because if you want to do G2 reviews, you're going to need them to come in and have that comms with customers. So maybe it's, I don't know if I'd use the word committee, but like, I think Alex used the word composite of like, maybe it is like fractional people on this Avengers team for a temporary amount of time before you can validate it. And then like at some point you need to add some structure. But right now, like I wouldn't think you form a brand new team just on this, but maybe it's like, hey, we believe these are the skill sets and profiles we need to validate this before we invest more resources or something. Because it's still early days. Like we have some ideas that works, but it is still significantly from the lens of an SEO. And we're part of that.
It has to be cross-functional though.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it's the early days, like I cannot imagine that part of it changing. So like that part, the committee, the cross-functional, the composite nature of it, what those roles are made up of could change. But it can't be just like SEOs doing SEO stuff. I mean, there's a significant overlap tactically. It can't be just digital PR and PR teams just doing PR stuff. It's like there's owned content, like how you're talking about the product, which typically they're not doing. So there has to be a blend. And David, to the earlier point you made around most people coming to us from the performance side, I do think that's somewhat selection bias, back to our research stuff, because we are performance and typically speak to SEO audiences and we're better known in that space and we're more nascent on the digital PR side.
Good point.
It's so hard to know what the general market sentiment is, but I went to the Profound conference in New York and I didn't meet everybody there, but I met a good sample. And I would say somewhere from 10 to 30% were from the PR and comms or brand side. So multiple different departments are coming to this conversation. I would say it's not, in my experience, just SEOs or just, growth marketers or something like that. It does seem like a lot of people care about this.
Yeah, this is interesting. I want to think on this some more. Maybe it'll be like a blog post or something because it's a big question. I mean, what I'm finding is a lot of the more established companies, let's say thousands of employees, I'm finding they come to us and they say, hey, we have resources. We kind of have an idea of what we want to do. We have an idea of who might pull in, but can we get some help thinking about the strategy and how we might approach this? And what I feel like this is part of the conversation that we should be having with those folks. And they're probably thinking about who the hell do I need to hire next year to own this, or does someone internal own it? And does that even make sense?
Another complexity to throw into this is, do you all feel like company to company, it varies so much who needs to be involved? In the sense that, I'm talking to one company who is Series B or C, but they've done basically zero owned content. So they have very few blog posts, like 2 product pages, despite their product doing like tons and tons of other things. So with them, I'm like, all right, what we're going to do is going to look very, very similar to SEO, to content SEO. And then other companies where they've got this established presence and they're pretty well saturated on visibility metrics, but they aren't being communicated accurately or positively, or there's certain things that are getting overlooked by the LLMs. To me, that would warrant a totally different strategy, and the strategy would warrant a totally different team working on it. I'm finding just like such a high variance with like what the hell the problem is to solve.
Yeah, it depends on who they have internally. And then how much they can get done or how much they can move on our behalf. That's my experience, like how much they can push on our behalf, or if it's just easier for us to do that work.
Well, I'm even saying, Ali, I'm even saying like I can go into a sales call sometimes and be like, you should create a product page, a feature page for this specific thing, an industry page for this, a listicle for this, and a comparison page here, and just do that 3 times for each product. And then other times, like if I'm talking to Hootsuite or, Salesforce, like I'm not going to tell them to create a listicle.
Well, yeah,
like
then it's just the size
and their
of the
content
company.
and SEO teams are going to be a very small portion of the work, in my opinion. So it's
just probably correlated
almost,
with like
that's what makes it way more fun to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like, I know in the past I don't think we've put this together still, but we've talked about this like organic growth maturity curve of, hey, based on where you are, like here's the type of program you should run. I think we have strong heuristics, but it's just not communicated out externally yet. Similar for AEO, like, oh, you have none of these core pages. It's pretty basic. You're not going to call it AEO because it's literally just producing the basic solutions and use case pages. But guess what? This is what you need. And so start with the basics before you start thinking about what sort of brand mention outreach you need to do, because also nobody knows about your brand.
Because that's what it is. It's like if you're unknown in LLMs, like you search top XYZ software or best or whatever, and they're not even on the list, that needs a whole other playbook than if you've got a brand that's almost the incumbent in the space. They're listed in every single like result. And then maybe that might be more of a sentiment focus, or you're trying to strengthen influence in like lesser known topic categories or product areas where they want to shine the light stronger on those. But then you've got, I think most of what we work with is in the middle where like there's mostly visibility. Maybe you're up against a couple big guys. And then in some areas you're a little bit weaker or less visible. And then it's a blend of like visibility and sentiment, which I think is really fun.
Yeah. David, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I was looking at the questions we have on our notes here, and there's some really spicy ones that I wanted to get to. Like, I'll present two that seemed interesting to me, and maybe you both will have an idea. But like, how do consumers get introduced to new brands in a world of AI?
Yeah.
But also, like, how are SEO jobs changing over time? So I don't know if either of those call to you.
So I want to take the first one because I actually wanted to take Ali's point to that next point.
Yeah.
Which is let's say that spectrum is like very black and white. Like some, have basically a dearth of content, and others it's a totally different problem. They're very saturated and like they're ubiquitous within listicles and review sites and all that stuff, and different problem. So the former is fun because you're going to show visibility increases very, very quickly doing basic bottom of the funnel content creation and then surround sound SEO. The playbook is very obvious. The strategy is quite simple, but the fun thing is you're going to move the needle very quickly. On the latter side, one thing that I think is interesting is most of the focus has been on bottom of the funnel with LLMs. But an interesting idea that came up at Profound's conference is a significant portion of users will basically use ChatGPT like a diary, and they'll basically complain about shit, right? I think you guys probably, I do this. I'm my shoulder's sore, like when I do jujitsu, like this hurts here, like what's going on? Like I'll describe my problems. They'll usually give me some sort of a remedy. And I don't think they got a stat on this, which leads me to believe we should do some research here. But some percentage of those pain points or just those problem statements, those diary entries in one-shot prompts result in a product recommendation. So that's pretty interesting to me, given we would traditionally call those pain point queries middle of the funnel, and it's going straight to the bottom of the funnel, which is solution aware, right? Mm-hmm. Even if it didn't, you have to imagine some percentage of people have no idea that they're in need of a product or a solution or a service. They just know that they've got something they want to fix. They want something else than what they've currently got, right? And that's where they're kind of just typing away. It's like a conversation with a friend. I'm really interested in how that portion of the funnel is going to work. It's very difficult to track because we don't have click-through rates. We don't have top of the funnel ultimate guides. We can't really like linearly track this stuff with clicks. But there's something there. And I know digital PR and original research has been talked a lot about there, assuming that more people are going to use Perplexity and deep research to analyze the space in the B2B context. Like a CMO is like, hey, like what's actually happening with AI overviews and click-through rates? Like, is it true that the traffic apocalypse is here? And they get like this deep research that goes out and finds 45 links. And then it says, according to Omniscient digital research, X, Y, and Z is happening. So that introduces Omniscient digital in some, cursory, maybe like light touch way in the earliest part of the funnel. And somebody's just trying to get a grasp of the landscape. And then they're like, well, how the hell do I save my traffic from click-through rate declines and AI overviews eating my traffic? And then it's like, maybe you have some tactical how-tos or some videos on that. And, I don't know what type of content format fits into there, but there is a play to getting brand unaware, solution unaware people in the earlier stages of the funnel within LLMs. And I think that's going to be an interesting problem area to focus on.
Most of those conversations typically result in like would you like me to recommend XYZ? Like if it doesn't, it prompts it. It just reminds me of like a middle funnel blog post. Like that was how we used to write them. Address the pain point, provide some solutions, and then surface the product as the ultimate solution at the bottom. It's old HubSpot days, but it reminds me of that kind of journey, except LLMs you're just piecemealing it and they're just bringing you to the solution.
Yeah, it reminds me of the voice of customer stuff that we always talk about, where what I'm telling folks right now, because it's still early days, is we would want to approach AEO the same way that we approach SEO, because we want to capture people who are in a buying cycle, currently evaluating products, which makes sense. Over time, I think it makes sense to go up the funnel to like, hey, people who are searching about these challenges that they have. But in order to produce the content to then be presented by LLMs, you need to be aware of what pain points that they would be asking about or what's top of mind for these folks. Like, I still think you wouldn't, like if you're like I can't think of an example, but if your traffic's getting eaten away because your what is a 401k page is like used to be ranking and now that answer is being presented by AI overviews or something, is that really the query you want to go after? Or would you rather go after like low cost 401k or something like that? If you're a 401k provider.
Well, it's crazy though, David. I agree mostly, but didn't you have like some data point with a client where, I don't remember if it was a client or like they found us this way, but it was through a what is query and like they actually got recommended a product within the what is query. I don't remember. This was a little while back. There was like a what is category type question. And then the output in the LLMs was like, category X is blah, 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 including products A, B, and C. Yeah.
What is data architecture? It was a what is query, but a concept that was very niche to the audience in this space. So the assumption is that I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. It was almost like
like if we were to use another
pre-qualification, because like it was such a niche topic that like if you're looking for it, I think ChatGPT collapsed the funnel further because the next possible stage would be trying to find something to do this thing. I'm not making a lot of sense, but
like what is a CRM versus if I typed what is an AI native CRM? I'm curious. I hear this phrase all the time. I went to a meetup the other day and somebody's like, oh, I'm using this AI native CRM. It's so cool. I'm like, what the hell's an AI native CRM? I go to the bathroom and just type that so I sound cool when I come back. And then it's like, an AI native CRM is built on top of unstructured data. It does X, Y, and Z.
Here's an example.
It includes products like Day and Attio and these products, right?
So it was almost like a qualified 101 search or something like that. But it just provided recommendations in the response.
The hard part about these is
I've never gotten that from ChatGPT.
Oh, really? I've had it a few times actually. I think the hard part about that is like there's like a conceptual model of the world, abstract frameworks. It's how I think oftentimes. Not everybody thinks that way. So you can believe that this is true, that having content related to the category connects you to the category. Thus, you have some probability of being related to the category. The problem is how to measure it, right? It's like pretty hard to like find out if you're actually being recommended aside some top of the funnel queries like that within an LLM. So that's where I don't know if the analytics see it better, if we go back to a more kind of brand oriented Mad Men type world, where we just sort of have good faith that this is contributing to the, incremental pipeline and revenue. And, we have self-reported attribution that can add some color and clarity to that, but ultimately we just can't track it all. I think that's the tough part. I am looking more at citation share, even though it's kind of a stupid metric. I've started to think about like the percentage of the conversation that you are informing quantitatively, right? You're tracking prompts that you've set up, obviously, so there's some bias there. But, if you start at 2% and you go to 20%, presumably your brand and your website is informing 20% of the results, right? So that's one way I've been looking at it, but
I have too. I think
problem.
that's I've been looking at it more so for that later stage leadership tier strategy. as one of the things to influence and increase. When you filter out the branded prompts, then you get a real picture of like, how strong is my voice in my category, and break it down by topic category as well. So when you determine like the top 4 to 6 like areas that you want to have a voice, usually they're aligned with your product. Then you look at the citation share as well. And I think it also reflects like how optimized your site is for LLMs as well. Like, I think that that's something that you can influence on page. And then over time, when you introduce new research or introduce new product pages or introduce a new product, then there's a likelihood of that getting picked up quicker and more accurately.
This is a total turn, and I know we're almost coming up on time, but what do you think about personalization as it relates to the LLM outputs and recommendations? This is like one of the biggest problems that we have to deal with, because we're getting incognito data. It's basically the generic thing with Peak, and Profound introduced personas, which is interesting. But my ChatGPT knows me well enough to know what kind of clothes I like, because I've asked it about certain brands. I've uploaded photos wearing clothes to basically be like, hey, does this look cool? I don't know if you guys have done that. It does give you cool tips. But my presumably if I search like best men's clothes, X, Y, and Z criteria, and David does the same, and 5 other people do the same, like we'll actually probably get different brands recommended in different orders. So have you all thought much about that?
I think the only thing that comes to mind is like what we talked about a few minutes ago about like very accurate, detailed use case pages, product pages, like making sure to be articulate about who you serve, why your product and your solution is aligned with that audience, and being detailed in your pain point and solution and use case related content. I mean, I can't speak to how it would connect back to what ChatGPT has collected about each of us as individuals. But if they know I'm on the client success team, and, I have this big of a team, and this is the company that I work for, and, whatever other details, then when I search for like best CRM and I don't put any of those details in, it's probably going to filter it further to like agency CRM for XYZ size teams serving these types of customers. Like, it'll probably do that filtering for me, and therefore it will pull products that have articulated that in a lot of their copy and their content.
I'm gonna throw something your way. Your tactics make total sense to me, but I'm going to throw something out, and we've talked a lot about like things coming full circle. We've talked about customer research being the base layer, the only true way to kind of understand prompts, and a lot of the foundations are coming back into play. Personas, right? Customer personas. I've been on record as saying I don't like personas because people would do these like silly marketing Mary. Yeah. Growth Gary and stuff like that. And there are these really high level useless like facsimiles of a person that are 5 bullet points and like a title and a job, like a salary range or something like that. However, I think like, let's imagine you have a CRM and you could sell this startups. Let's just say startup scale-ups and enterprises, right? Like the most basic categories. And you have a customer base that is represented by all 3 of those categories. I think now with LLMs, you can actually upload much more detailed and rich personas because it can slurp up tons of pages of like qualitative unstructured data related to them, as opposed to like summarizing it in some like 1-page designed asset that your marketing team can use to create copywriting. So you can actually upload a lot more interesting data from your sales transcripts and your customer research, et cetera. And then if you could angle that against your data in Profound or Peak or whatever, and then see the differences in the outputs in terms of visibility, like maybe your 20% visibility for the startup persona and your 80% for the enterprise. And then you can also look at the perception and the influence layer as to how you're being spoken about for a startup, right? And maybe it's like, oh, this CRM is super complex and expensive. It's not the best option for startups or something like that. And then that can allow you to actually hatch marketing campaigns that are broadly inclusive of, PR, brand, off page, like all the elements that we had talked about before. And that gives you a sort of segmented approach. And then you can kind of align that with your, go-to-market planning overall and like your revenue per segment.
Sure. Sounds good to me.
I mean, I think just to get tactical here, because I did this recently, talking about the unstructured data for personas, one could take a bunch of sales call transcripts, put them into a notebook LM notebook, and then ask, like, based on all these sales calls, what are the most common questions that come up? What are the most interesting things that people care about? What are the pain points and challenges that they're facing? And if you already have personas, you can compare literally what is being said on sales calls to your personas. And if how accurate you are, or maybe it's changed, and that might present a discussion point. But then that also helps you figure out what prompts to track. And like, hey, these are literally the questions people are asking. Like, I don't need to go listen to all these calls. Just put it onto Notebook LLM, have it summarize it for me, and then take those prompts, put them into Profound, and like, you'll iterate from there. But at least just take the raw prompts that it recommends and put it in and see what your baseline is. And you can decide whether or not it's relevant or not. But that seems like a very actionable thing.
I'm glad you said the word actionable. I was just thinking that, because a lot of people will like, I don't know, they'll be a little bit salty around like the actionability of some of this, but I see that as being such a fun, like interesting pool of data. And even for ourselves, right? If you imagine like Omniscient Digital, we track our own prompts and we know our visibility in relation to AEO and GEO and AI search. We know our visibility in relation to B2B SEO and SEO generally. We know our visibility in relation to digital PR. And we know generally who hires us. We have a couple different titles that usually are a point of contact or the decision maker. And it's not always the same. So first off, segment, do the classic persona ICP data, right? And then pull all the sales transcripts through David's process there, and then upload those against the prompts, and maybe introduce some new prompts for the different personas given the research, and then see how we show up in relation to them. And then not only does that say, hey, you should create a listicle for, director of SEO who cares about AI search, it says, here's the fucking topics you should talk about on the podcast. It's like, it actually gives us much more of a intelligence pool for how we should be speaking to reach those target personas. And that's super interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just also think of like, I'm literally going to download our Firefly PDFs and do this again for us and be like, what research questions should we run surveys on? That'll be interesting.
Oh, it's fascinating stuff. Good stuff. So many questions to answer, huh?
Good chat.
This is the fun times. You actually have to figure stuff out and problem solve and use your critical thinking skills versus just following some sort of existing playbook.
As I've said many times before, like I don't think any of us wanted to spend the glory days of our careers, like, writing ultimate guides, building some links, and then arbitraging content from your top 3 competitors. Like, it's just much more fun this way.